Hello everybody and welcome back to artofdino.com and saveearth.us, and I found an interesting one today. In September 3rd, 1886, the Democratic leader. And the article is called The Wild Days of Atlanta, but I'm kind of convinced that it's supposed to read The Wild Dogs of Atlanta. I'm not really sure, but this is a post-Civil War story that I find really interesting, especially in the way they word things and just in general. I feel like there's something being said here in this article that is kind of questionable or makes us think, because as we all know, we are all questioning the Civil War and its true intentions and purpose and the reality of it, as you see all these amazingly old cities that we're never really told about, and buildings we're never really heard about being destroyed in because of fires, earthquakes, all these different things right around this time of the Civil War. So was it war, or was it intentional destruction from maybe even a war that we have been misguided upon? I'm not really sure, but take a look at this article about the wild dogs of Atlanta, in the wild days of Atlanta, I guess, but kind of read between the lines and let me know what you think, and I'll chime in from time to time. But here we go. It says, The Wild Days or Dogs of Atlanta, a curious result of the late Civil War, ferocious brutes at large. Did you ever hear of the wild dogs of Atlanta? At one time, the country around here was almost at the mercy of these savage animals. Horses, elephants, and camels can be made to take an almost human interest in war, but dogs cannot stand the racket. The din of battle and the smell of villainous saltpeter breaks them up entirely. And I, as a side little chime in, this is definitely the case on Aruba as well. During New Year's Eve, I'm very familiar with Aruba, and I love that island. And I guess on New Year's Eve, when they have all the fireworks going off all over the island, turns into like a massive firework, and the dogs go nuts. They get lost. They go all over the place. It's crazy the way the dogs are affected by just that. So you can imagine war or whatever the destruction they were doing being just as similar. So here we go. Our dogs had a hard time during the siege. So the siege is what they refer to the Civil War. And so this is the Democratic something paper. So again, it's interesting the way they refer to the Civil War. So our dogs had a hard time during the siege. There were thousands of them in those days, and when the season of short rations set in, they were the first to feel it. In many instances, they were abandoned by their refugee owners and had to literally forage for a living. The thunder of the big guns, the unearthly shrieks of the shells, the noise of falling buildings, the rattle of musketry, and the heavy tramp of marching soldiers all struck terror to the canine contingent. Toward the close of the siege, nearly every dog in the city was half rabid or in the last stage of nervous prostration. The wretched brutes sought shelter under houses and in bomb-proofs. Majestic mastiffs and surly bulldogs curled their tails between their legs and yelped mournfully at every unusual sound. Hundreds of the bolder ones made a frantic break over the breastworks and ditches and made their way through the lines of both armies, never stopping until they reached the woods. It was even worse after Sherman's army entered the place. The citizens were driven out in such a hurry that they had no time to think of their pets, and no means of transportation for them. I'd like to research this, what Sherman's army did to Atlanta, because I'm sure there's some interesting facts out there that are probably a mix of lie and some truth. But either way, the citizens were driven out in such a hurry that they had no time to think of their pets. So I wonder what happened there. And no means of transportation for them. Did they, I don't know. Later, the destruction of the city by fire and the general pandemonium that ensued scattered the few remaining dogs. These innocent victims of the ravages of war had a terrible experience during the rigorous winter of 1864-65. Their misery drove them to form strange partnerships, and it was a common sight to see them roving in bands of a dozen or more. The old saying, "Banish the dog from his kennel and you have a wolf," was illustrated in this case. In the course of 5 or 6 months, the country people for 50 miles around were spinning marvelous yarns about them wild dogs from Atlanta. The dog belongs to the genus which produces the wolf, the jackal, and the fox. Tame dogs, of course, lose many of the characteristics of these animals, but when persecution and misery cause them to relapse into a wild state, they take the appearance, the habits, and tastes of wolves and jackals. Such was notoriously the fact with the Atlanta dogs. They lost every trace of domesticity plasticity. They grew to enormous size with savage eyes and cruel-looking fangs. Very interesting here what all this is talking about. Almost like they were a different breed of dog entirely from just a different type of people. Like they're still not saying like who was laid siege, why these people were just immediately locked up, just war. All of a sudden the people just decided to, like the Union or whatever, decided to just destroy all of Atlanta. Like what is the rhyme or reason to any of this? So again, who knows what the reality of that time period was. But occasionally a gang of these ferocious beasts would swoop down on a farm yard, devouring chickens and pigs and attacking men when they stood in their way. It took the liveliest kind of hooting to drive them off. Sometimes they would surround a lonely cabin and wait for the inmates to come out. They even made raids into little villages, forcing the inhabitants to shut themselves up in their houses. The disappearance of many a Negro in those perilous times was fully accounted for when his skeleton was found with every particle of flesh gnawed off and with the ground around showing evidence of a desperate struggle. Again, I feel like there's more we're just not being told here about all of this. Early in 1865, when a few refugees began returning to Atlanta, they had to struggle with these wild dogs for the ruins. Bloody encounters occurred among the ash heaps and piles of debris. Every cellar and hole in the ground held these ravenous brutes, and they leaped upon men, women, and children without the slightest provocation. At that time, it was dangerous to ride or drive out in the country. On the main road between here and Decatur, in broad daylight, dogs were known to attack horses attached to buggies, forcing their drivers to open a hot fusillade with their revolvers. After getting this taste of a wildlife, the Atlanta dogs went to the bad altogether. They never reformed. A relentless warfare was waged upon them from Stone Mountain to Kennesaw, and one by one they bit the dust until they all were wiped out. The reader at a distance must not jump to the conclusion that this indiscriminate slaughter has caused any unusual scarcity of dogs in this region. Thanks to the universal human weakness for pets, we are abundantly supplied with bench-legged Fices, terriers, pups, Newfoundlanders, mastiffs, and bulls. If some unexpected calamity should cause them all to go wild, after the fashion of their predecessors, they would be an uncommonly tough crowd to deal with, says the Atlanta Constitution. So again, I don't know what to think. Again, at the very least, this is a very interesting story that I've never heard about, never really thought about either, is just that the dogs and the pets would inevitably become this way. But there's just too many things in this article that I just question, or that I'm not really sure about, that just kind of tingled something in me that I wanted to get out there and put it out to see what you guys thought. Like the thunder of the big guns, the unearthly shrieks of the shells, the noise of falling buildings, the rattle of musketry. It just none of this makes sense. Like, what are they just indiscriminately just blowing up cities? Like, what? Like, I just because of like their different beliefs. I don't understand it. There's so many weird things about the Civil War that just don't make sense. Like maybe the sides have been altered, the truth and the true intentions and purpose of everything has been altered. The people involved have been altered, I believe. So again, no idea. I just wanted to share this with you guys because it is very interesting, those wild dogs from Atlanta. So, and whenever I come across stuff that I've never heard of before and I find interesting, I like to share it with you all just to see what you all think. So definitely share your comments below. Love to hear from you all. And if you can shed any light on what happened in 1864 in Atlanta, put some links in, and I'll probably dive down the rabbit hole a little bit as well. But I'd like to hear what you all say, especially from people who live out there. You all seem to know the most. So have a great day. Bless you all from artofdino.com and saveearth.us.